بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Hello again. So we are at the second part of the third week. At the first part, we talked about the difference between Tadabbur and Tafsir. Now we are going to talk about Surah Al-Muzzammil. We are going to have the conclusion about this chapter. We reviewed the verses at the first and second week. We understand the concept of each verse and we followed verses one by one to understand the concept of each paragraph. Now we want to understand the concept of the whole chapter. What should we do in this step? The first thing is we have to understand the concept of each paragraph and the main goal of each paragraph and then find out the connection between those paragraphs. Let's have a review on our paragraphs. As I mentioned before, this chapter has three paragraphs. The first paragraph is verses 1 to 14, the second paragraph verses 15 to 19, and the third paragraph verse 20, which was a long verse. So at the first paragraph, we saw that God started talking to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and described him as enwrapped and told him that you are and described him as enwrapped because God wanted to tell us in which situation he was, and he wanted to tell us that he enwrapped himself in a heavy garment. Muzammil is a word that describes the situation that when someone is sad or tired or disappointed and he want to have like a short nap, and by enwrapping himself in something he is trying to be separated from that environment and he's trying to have some relaxation. God called him by Al-Muzammil or the enwrapped because he wanted to tell us the situation that the prophet was in it. And then God issued some order. He told the prophet that you have to stand up at the night. You have to be prepared to continue your prophecy, and this is a very difficult path. And by enwrapping yourself in a heavy garment, you cannot be prepared. You have to do some spiritual practices and you have to be stronger and stronger because we are gonna send down to you some weighty words, which means Qur'an. Qur'an is a weighty word, it's a heavy word. And God told the Prophet that you have to stand up during the night and recite the Quran and make yourself stronger and stronger. And that spiritual impression that is created in you during the night is much stronger and better during the daytime. And I choose nighttime because you have a actually busy time during the daytime and you cannot do this kind of a spiritual practice during the day. There are many people coming to you asking questions, so you have to do pray during the night time. And then God told him that you have to remember the name of your Lord and trust him and be patient over those people who are bothering you. This was the overall concept in the first paragraph. Now we can answer this question. I'm going to ask you, what was the reason that God sent down these verses? This is very clear now. We understand the verses, and now it should be very clear to answer this question. What was the reason that God sent down these verses? We do not need to go through historical document. You know, there are some historical document and they are telling us what was the sha'nun nuzul. Sha'nun nuzul is a Arabic term and it means the story or the situation that caused this chapter got sent down this chapter because of that situation. We don't need to check those Sha'nun Nuzul. We don't need to go through historical document. Just by reading these verses, now we can understand the prophet was sad and disappointed of people. They were bothering him. They were some kind of a wealthy people because God described them at the verse 11 as Olen Na'ma, which means who have wealth. They were wealthy people. They were trying to make fun of him. They were bothering him. They denied him and they reject his call. So the prophet was sad and disappointed from one side, and on the other side, receiving those weighty word and heavy words of Quran was difficult for him, and it was kind of even based on some narration, it says that he was shaking when he was receiving those words, and it was very difficult for him. So from two sides, from one side, disbelievers were bothering him. From the other side, receiving those heavy words were difficult for him. So he needed some actually suggestion or some comments from God. So God sent down these verses to help him, to be prepared for the rest of his prophecy. So without going through historical document, we can easily find out what was the reason that God sent down verses 1 to 14, because the prophet needed some help. He was tired because of those heavy words. His body was shaking and he was tired, and sometimes he was even in a like a semi-coma situation because of receiving those heavy words. And on the other side, those disbelievers, they were bothering him. So God sent down the first paragraph to do what? To solve this problem and preparing the prophet, peace be upon him, to continue the path of receiving and delivering the divine revelation. Prepare yourself to receive the divine revelation by standing up at the night and reciting the Quran. Trust God and be patient with whatever deniers say, and leave them with God, as some severe punishment awaits them. So the first paragraph solved this problem by these verses and preparing the prophet. God suggested the prophet to stand up during the night and do this kind of a spiritual practice and prepare yourself for the other verses. We are going to send you other verses, and about those deniers, just leave them, and God is gonna deal with them. There are some severe punishment for them. So it was the main concept of first paragraph. And then second paragraph. At the second paragraph, we saw that God started talking with deniers and disbelievers. When we say disbelievers, they can disbelieve in God, they can disbelieve in the hereafter, they can disbelieve in the day of judgment, and many of these things. What we mean by disbeliever in this paragraph, specifically in this paragraph, they disbelieved in the messenger. Okay, so there are different type of disbelieving. In this paragraph, when God said disbelievers, it means those who disbelieved the messenger. They were trying to stand against the messenger of God. So God started talking to them, and he brought an example and told them that Pharaoh, with all of those power and army and wealth and all of those things, he was not able to protect himself against God. And you know what was the end of his story. So that was Pharaoh. You are nothing compared to him. And obviously, you cannot protect yourself against God. And on the day that you can assume that it's already happening, at the verse 18, when it says the sky is broken thereby, it doesn't mean that it's exactly in this time, okay? It's not determining a specific time. It is telling us that it's very close to you and it can happen any minute. And it's very close to you. And you have to know that when God said something, his promise is to be fulfilled. And the sky should be assumed that it's broken already, because this is very close to you, okay? So this verse started talking with those disbelievers. And now, without checking any historical document, without going through a narration or without going through interpretation, we can understand what was the reason that God sent down these verses 15 to 19. What was the reason? there was a group of people who disbelieved in the messenger, and they were trying to stand against him because God bring a example and he told them about Pharaoh. It means they were trying to do similar things that Pharaoh did. So God sent down these verses to solve this problem, to talk with them and warn them. And the main goal of this chapter is of this paragraph, sorry, is this warning infidels about disbelief in the mission of the messenger of God. Disbelief in and disobedience to a messenger of God will result in divine punishment, as Pharaoh suffered the promised punishment. This is a warning by God to anyone who wishes to take a path toward him. So this was a warning, and it was, as you saw in this paragraph, God didn't mention the name of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the name of Musa alayhi salam. He only mentioned the messenger of God because that is the important part. They are delivering a message from God and they are a link between God and people. So if you are disbelieving in them, you are actually rejecting a messenger from God. And God didn't mention their name because He wanted to tell us that it doesn't matter what is their name. The important thing is you have to be aware they are a messenger of God. And this is a warning for all of us. If we want to take a path toward God, we have to be aware. We have to take this warning. We have to respect them and we have to accept those messages that they are trying to deliver to us. So this was the main concept of the second chapter, second paragraph. Sorry, I used chapter and paragraph several times in wrong way. I hope that it's not confusing you. So the third paragraph first started talking with the prophet and telling him that I can observe you. You are doing the night vigil, and there is a group of people who are following you. And God provides some reduction to them. Again, without any historical document, without any narration, now we can easily understand what was the reason that God sent down the verse 20. A group of believers started following the prophet. They were good people. They were trying to follow him. They were trying to accompany him. They were trying to do whatever that they can to help him and easy the path of the prophecy for him. In this situation, God started talking to them to provide and offer some reduction for them. God told them that I know you are kind people, you are nice people, you are trying to help the prophet, you are trying to follow him, but I am your Lord and I know about the night and the day and your body and your needs. I created all of these things and I'm telling you that you are not able to do similar to him. You are not on that level because you may be ill, you may be go for travel, you may be in an army as a soldier. So I am gonna offer you some reduction if it's difficult for you to do the night vigil on that level. So you can take this reduction and you can recite the Quran as much as is feasible for you. You can perform the prayer and you can give zakah and you can loan God a goodly loan. And God provides some reduction for them. So this is very obvious that verse 20 was about some difficulties among believers. Believers were trying to do something. It was difficult for them. God observed them and he provided this reduction for them. And one important point that I want to mention is about the time difference between sending down the verse 20 and the other verses. It's very obvious based on the topic that there was a time difference between them. We don't need again to check the historical document when the first paragraph was sent down and when the second paragraph or the third paragraph. When the first paragraph was sent down, it was issuing those orders to the prophet and to stand up at the night. And obviously, there was a time difference between these two paragraphs. People were trying to do the same. and they were suffering of doing it, and then God sent down the verse 20. We cannot say for sure for how many how long was the time difference between these, maybe several weeks, maybe several months, or maybe several years. We do not know that for sure. But that is obvious that there was a time difference between them. So how God solved this problem for people, for those believers? Providing some reduction for believers who accompany the prophet in standing vigil. Believers can prepare themselves to help fulfill the prophetic mission by reciting as much of the Quran as is feasible, along with performing their important religious obligations. So God provide those reduction for them to tell them that you can do these things if you want to help the prophet instead of standing up at the night. Standing up at the night is specific for him because he has to be ready for receiving the other words and the other chapters. If you want to help him, you can do the other stuff. So about the whole chapter, let me a little, I have to, okay, this is better now. About the whole chapter, main goal of chapter 73 was helping to fulfill the prophetic mission by preparing the messenger and believers who accompany him and warning disbelievers and those who deny the mission. How did I reach to this point? I reached to this conclusion based on all of those three paragraphs. From the first paragraph, I learned this, preparing the prophet. In the first paragraph, God was talking to the prophet, issuing some order, and God told him that you have to be prepared. So this is from first paragraph. From the second paragraph, I learned that warning to disbelievers. God warned the disbelievers that you cannot protect yourself against God if you disbelieve in the prophet. And from the third paragraph, I learned that reduction for believers, and reduction for believers was actually preparing them to help the prophet. Based on all of these
بسم
three,
الله.
sorry, based on all of these three paragraphs that I learned one by one. From the first paragraph, preparing the prophet, from the second paragraph, warning to disbelievers, from the third paragraph, preparing the believers. As a conclusion over all of these three paragraphs, we can say that this chapter was about preparing the messenger and believers who accompany him and warning disbelievers. So it was the main goal of this chapter 73. And there are some chapters in Quran, for example, chapter 74, which we are going to have it next week, and other chapters, that they were all some orders and some suggestions from God to the prophet to prepare him to go through this prophecy and fulfill his prophecy. The obvious point from these chapters is how much God tried to actually prepare such a perfect human to do his prophecy for us. And this is very kind of him. This is very kind of the prophet that he took all of those suffers and he went through all of those suffers to receive and deliver those messages for us. And I am suggesting you to think about it, to think about all of those difficulties that he went through. For what? Was he a wealthy person for his own like income or stuff? No, he never asked people for money. He was like very similar to those poor people on that society. He wasn't in a palace and he didn't have a luxury house. He didn't have any kind of those things that king or stuff like this they have. he was very similar to those poor people in the society. So obviously it wasn't for himself. It wasn't for having a better income and a better salary. And it was all suffer for him in this life. And he went through all of those things for us because he was so kind. He was a perfect human and he had a good and deep knowledge about the other life and how dangerous it is. If we do not do these laws, we are going to have a terrible life on the other side. He did all of these things for us. And we have to think about it, how we are dealing with this message. That message is Quran now, and we are having it in our hand. How are we going to deal with it? Are we going to just read it and recite it with a beautiful voice and with a beautiful tone? And that is it enough about it? We have to understand it and try to try to follow it and try to have a lifestyle based on that. Yesterday was actually the 15th of Shaban. 15th of Shaban among all Muslims, Sunni or Shia, all of them, they do the night vigil at the night before that, which means the night of the half of the of Shaban, which is a moon in Arabic calendar. And only for that one night, or only for some several nights during the Ramadan, that we try to stand vigil, that we try to stand up during the night, we get so tired. We sleep the whole day before that night to be prepared for that night. And then we just stand up a few hours on that night. And then we sleep again the next day after that, the whole day, because we are tired for just 2, 3 hours at the night before that. So we sleep like 48 hours only for that 2, 3 hours on that night, only for just several days. And could you imagine that the Prophet did it every night, only to be prepared for receiving the verses and chapters of Quran? This is just a part of his prophecy. This is just, I can say, a tiny part of his prophecy. He had many difficulties dealing with those crazy disbelievers who named him as a magician, as a crazy guy, so many disrespectful things. They attacked him. So many wars that happened during his life, specifically when he went to Medina several times, disbelievers from Mecca attacked him. When he was in Mecca, they were so suffer on him. They banned him in a very tiny village with all of those believers. They didn't have food, they didn't have water, they didn't have anything. In 23 years, which was his prophecy, he went through all of these suffers just to deliver us that message, just to deliver us the Quran, to receive those message and deliver it to us. So we have to think about it. Are we thankful for this message or not? Are we listening to this message or not? So now I'm gonna start the recitation of this chapter. We are gonna listen to it. I'm gonna stop the recording. We are gonna listen to the recitation, and then if you have any question, we can talk about